Iowa's air, it looks clean, and for the most part the state's overall air quality is good. But appearances can sometimes be deceiving. Every year we pump tons of toxic emissions into our air, more than goes into our water and land combined. Yet most Iowans pay little attention to air quality. But if we ignore our clean air, it'll go away. Keeping the air clean and breathable is an ongoing effort, and it involves everyone: the Iowa Department of Natural Resources Air Quality Bureau, Iowa businesses, and Iowa citizens. One of the responsibilities we all share in helping to keep the air clean is controlling the emission of asbestos, a known carcinogen. This is especially true of contractors, building owners, and homeowners. To help you better understand your responsibilities of controlling asbestos emissions and protecting the public health, the Iowa Departments of Natural Resources and Economic Development have teamed up to shed some light on asbestos, the miracle mineral. Asbestos. Once upon a time, it was known as the miracle mineral. It's not surprising though. Here was a plentiful, naturally occurring substance that could be separated into fibers and spun into a fabric that was strong, did an excellent job insulating, and could withstand intense heat and fire. No wonder it was used in over 3,000 common building products all across Iowa. Products like floor tiles and linoleum, pipe and boiler insulation, heat duct wrap, joint tape and cement, transite or slate siding, asphalt roofing and shingles, ceiling tiles, joint compound, and many acoustical and decorative textures. So, if you decide to remodel, renovate, or demolish structures containing asbestos, the asbestos could be released into the air, and since it's been proven to cause cancer, that creates a health hazard. That's where NESHAP comes in. It stands for National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants. These are federal regulations designed to limit the amount of asbestos in the air. In Iowa, they're carried out by the Department of Natural Resources on behalf of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The NESHAP standards aren't the only regulations governing asbestos. The NESHAP for asbestos recognizes that asbestos materials are only dangerous when they're disturbed or in poor condition. That's why NESHAP only calls for asbestos removal if significant quantities are going to be disturbed. Prior to demolition and/or renovation, sites must be thoroughly inspected for asbestos. Proper notices must be filed with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and the asbestos materials, if present, must be removed and disposed of safely and properly. If you're a building owner, this video will give you a brief overview of whether the EPA's asbestos regulations apply to you, and if they do, how to properly check your site for asbestos. So, what types of structures are subject to the EPA asbestos regulations? They include institutional, commercial, public, and industrial installations or buildings. The regulations also apply to ships and both active and inactive waste disposal sites. In Iowa, residential homes are not regulated unless 2 or more homes are demolished or renovated as part of a commercial, public, industrial, or institutional project. So let's say a school, business, or industry buys an adjacent lot in order to expand. They knock down the existing houses to build a parking lot, apartment, or office building, or perhaps several homes are raised as part of a FEMA project after a flood. Those situations are regulated. But if you remodel your personal house or raise it for the purposes of rebuilding, that's exempt. However, for personal safety, it's a good idea for homeowners to hire professionals to test suspect materials and remove asbestos if it's present. Single homes are regulated when they're burned for firefighter training. The bottom line is virtually all the buildings in Iowa except individual private homes are subject to the asbestos regulations. So if you're planning a project, you need to inspect, measure, and classify. Generally, three things determine if a project is regulated: the amount of asbestos present, the type of project, and the size of the project. Now, don't worry that every time you pick up a hammer and saw means you have to inspect for asbestos. Very small projects that don't meet minimum thresholds are exempt, as we'll see in a moment. Before work begins, you need to have a thorough asbestos inspection performed by a professional. All suspected asbestos-containing materials require expert sampling and lab analysis. Otherwise, they're assumed to contain asbestos and must be handled accordingly. Now, sampling and testing isn't something just anyone can or should do. The inspector should have a thorough knowledge of asbestos, know sampling techniques, and be familiar with all asbestos regulations. The facility owner can be held liable if the inspection doesn't find all the asbestos that's present, so you'll want to use a competent, certified contractor. Only inspect the areas where the renovation or demolition will occur. You don't need to inspect the entire facility unless the entire facility is being demolished or renovated. When you get the lab test results, you'll know if any asbestos is present. If it's present in a ratio greater than 1%, then you officially have asbestos-containing material, known as ACM. Often the results will list the asbestos's mineral name, such as chrysotile, instead of the word asbestos. So you need to know basic mineral names to understand the lab report. If you have any questions, call the lab that performed the tests. The next step is to determine whether the project is a renovation or a demolition. Demolition is defined as removing a load-bearing support. So if your project involves removing a structurally important wall, it's a demolition. If not, it's a renovation. Intentionally burning a building is also considered a demolition. Knowing if the project is a demolition or a renovation is important because different rules and procedures apply to each. All demolitions require submitting a notification form to the Department of Natural Resources, regardless of whether asbestos is present or not, and after submitting the form, 10 working days must pass before demolition begins. To meet the 10 working day requirement, count the day the notice form is postmarked as day 1. You can begin work on the 11th working day. Working days are Monday through Fridays, so don't count a Saturday postmark as day 1. But if a holiday falls on a Monday through Friday, count it as a working day. Your asbestos contractor should be able to tell what categories of asbestos are present. He or she might use the terms friable or non-friable. Friable means that the material, when dry, can be crumbled, pulverized, or reduced to powder by hand pressure. If it cannot, that means it's non-friable. There are two categories of non-friable asbestos material. Category 1 includes packings, gaskets, resilient floor covering, and asphalt roofing products that are more than 1% asbestos. Generally, these materials rarely become friable. Category 2 is a catch-all, containing all other materials that have asbestos. Some of the more common materials in this category are transite or slate siding and stucco. Once you have a rough idea of how much asbestos is present and what category it falls into, you need to know which materials are regulated. Regulated asbestos-containing material, or RACM, includes any friable asbestos material, Category 1 material that has become friable, Category 1 material that has or will be sanded, ground, cut, or abraded, and Category 2 material that is likely to become or has become crumbled, pulverized, or reduced to powder during the demolition or renovation. Category 1 materials generally do not become friable, so often they do not need to be removed prior to demolition or renovation. But make sure the materials are in good condition. If they are in poor shape or if they have become friable, they gotta go. Also, if you sand, grind, abrade, drill, cut, or chip these materials, you have to treat them as friable and remove them under containment if enough material is present. Category 2 materials also need to be evaluated. If they are likely to become crushed, pulverized or reduced to powder during demolition or renovation, they need to be removed beforehand if enough is present. For example, asbestos cement siding should be removed before demolition if a wrecking ball, bulldozer, or crane is used because it's likely the siding will be pulverized. Next, measure how much regulated asbestos-containing material will be disrupted. Measure asbestos-containing surface areas like walls, floors, ceilings, and roofs in square feet. Measure pipes in linear feet and debris in cubic feet. The cubic foot measurement is the least used because materials generally shouldn't be in a debris state yet. Now, total up the amount of regulated asbestos-containing materials. Projects are fully regulated if the combined amounts of regulated materials meet or exceed one or all of the following thresholds: 160 square feet of surfacing material, 260 linear feet of pipe, or 35 cubic feet of debris. For example, a 4 by 8 sheet of wallboard or plywood is 32 square feet, so 5 sheets comes to 160 square feet. So if your project is very small, such as a wall opening for a door or a window, or tearing down a small shed that is much smaller in total size than the thresholds, no inspection, notice, or asbestos removal procedures apply. However, if you're doing numerous small projects during the year, you may exceed the threshold. Okay, so now that you know how much asbestos, if any, is present, what's next? Well, it depends on the type of project. Demolitions create more dust and disturb more material than renovations, so the regulations are tighter. For all demolitions, remember to submit the required notice form, even if no asbestos is present. Additionally, with the regulated asbestos-containing material above the thresholds, all asbestos materials must be removed before demolition. If the amount of material is below the thresholds, the asbestos can be left, but you must list the amount of asbestos present on the notice form. Failing to list asbestos materials that are left in the building is a violation. For a renovation, if the lab tests show the building materials contain less than 1% asbestos, the project is not regulated. In fact, you don't even need to submit a notice to the Department of Natural Resources. You can simply begin the project. Fill out a notice form and have the asbestos removed only if the amount of regulated asbestos-containing material meets or exceeds the thresholds. Finally, keep in mind that asbestos-containing materials add up. Amounts of regulated asbestos-containing materials for unplanned renovations and emergency repairs are cumulative for a calendar year. That means that once the threshold is reached, all notice, removal, emission control, and disposal requirements apply to future projects at that facility for the remainder of the calendar year. By the way, reducing a large project by breaking it into smaller segments to circumvent regulations is prohibited. Even planned projects that may include multiple demolitions and renovations over several years are regulated once the minimum thresholds are met. Remember why the regulations exist: to protect public health. Oh, got some more stuff here? Yeah, let's take it. Installation goes right along there. Now that we've covered the hazards of asbestos removal, let's take a look at the 2-page demolition and renovation notice form that must be filled out completely before any project begins. For demolitions, always file a notice form regardless of project size or presence of asbestos. It's important to remember after the form is sent that 10 working days must pass before work begins, giving the DNR time to see if the original sampling is accurate. Removing a load-supporting structure, like a single wall, is considered a demolition. For renovations, a form must be submitted if the regulated asbestos-containing material, or RACM, meets or exceeds 160 square feet, 260 linear feet, or 35 cubic feet. Quantities below the thresholds don't require a form, or if the material is less than 1% asbestos. In these cases, you may begin your project. So, who is responsible for submitting the notice form to DNR? Under the regulation, if the facility owner or operator fails to submit a notice, they are liable. However, the contractor will do the paperwork on behalf of the owner or operator. Work closely with the contractor to make sure the form is correctly and completely filled out. Incomplete notices are a violation. For example, a contractor fills out the form, but the demolition contractor hasn't been selected yet, so they leave that blank. That's a violation. The owner or operator shouldn't assume that a contractor is submitting an accurate form. If you have any questions, call the DNR. They want the job done right too. Be sure to read the manual with this video for more information on filling out the form. To avoid common mistakes, ensure that when you notify the DNR, you list the day the containment goes up, even though removal work may not begin for days. Put the date you actually begin asbestos removal so the DNR inspector can visit when the work occurs. If the DNR inspector shows up and you're not removing, you may get a notice of violation. Well, now the form is complete. By regulation, it must be mailed or hand-delivered. Faxes are not acceptable. The postmark date is the official record that begins the count for 10 working days. Hand-delivered notices are date-stamped immediately and count as the first working day. So what happens if you made a mistake and didn't notify properly? Our first and primary concern is public health. The first violation warrants a notice of violation. This officially documents the violation. A series of violations may trigger a monetary penalty or other court action. A paperwork mistake may count as a work practice violation because it was discovered on site. For example, an inspector shows up and the removal project hasn't begun, or the wrong date or address is provided in the paperwork. Work practice violations can result in fines of up to $10,000 per day. For more serious violations, EPA can fine $27,000 per day. Fortunately, that's rare. Strict regulations are enforced to prevent asbestos release during removal. At a removal site, you're likely to find a containment area. In smaller removal projects, a glove bag may be used. Containment, when properly used, reduces the risk of fiber release. Contents are kept under a negative airflow by a HEPA filter and air handling unit, so air is just moving into the area, not out. Inside the containment, materials must be adequately wet. This definition requires a significant penetration, usually water, to prevent the release of dust and particles. Workers should constantly ensure the materials are wet. Asbestos materials must be stored wet in leak-tight, sealed containers. Often bags are placed into metal drums or waste haulers. Before the bags and drums leave the containment, they are cleaned off in the decontamination shower to avoid carrying out asbestos particles. When asbestos-containing material is disposed of, there are several things to remember. First, the NESHAP regulations only apply to asbestos-containing waste materials, or ACWM, which refers to any waste that contains asbestos, like filters from control devices, friable asbestos material, bags or other packaging contaminated with asbestos, disposable equipment, clothing, plastic sheeting, shower water, and water from wetting procedures. Most asbestos materials require a Waste Shipment Record, or WSR. On-site material awaiting transport needs to be properly stored, labeled, and sealed in leak-tight containers. Include the name of the waste generator and the location where the waste originated. All AWCM must be landfilled as soon as practical under the regulation. The less time the material is on site, the less chance there is for an accidental release and violation. All landfills in Iowa are permitted to take AWCM. but not all accept it. Check with the nearest landfill for details. At the landfill, regulated material is buried and covered with 6 inches of compacted soil to prevent further disruption of asbestos materials. However, many fire departments are not aware that training fires are subject to the Asbestos NESHAP. Firefighters rank second only to contractors as the group most likely to suffer from asbestos-related disease. Intentionally burning a building is regulated as a demolition. This includes private homes as well. Thorough inspections, proper asbestos removal, and disposal and notification to DNR are required before burning occurs. If all layers of roofing material test negative, the asphalt material can be burned. This is allowed for 2 training fires annually. The DNR conducts hundreds of inspections of renovation and demolition projects across Iowa each year. By understanding what the DNR inspects, you can better ensure that you comply with the Asbestos NESHAP, as well as protecting yourself, your coworkers, and those in the community from exposure. Any visible dust inside or outside a containment area or glove bag is a violation. Remember, materials must be adequately wet at all times. Inspections may also occur well after the removal process. Inspectors are searching for leftover asbestos-containing materials which would violate the visible emission and adequately wet requirements. The best way to ensure compliance is to keep materials wet and make sure all material is removed and the area cleaned. Facility owners can double-check their contractor's work by looking for negative air pressure at containment areas and by ensuring bag materials are fully sealed, marked, and adequately wet. If you have concerns about your contractor's work, contact the Iowa Division of Labor, which certifies contractors. Now, this may seem like a lot of detailed information to provide, but it's necessary to ensure yours and the public's safety. If you have any questions, please call your local DNR. You all set?
Got 'em.
Hey, great.